Well, good morning everyone. It's really good to be able to share in worship with you again this morning. We're going to begin a new sermon series today. So the next few times that I am leading worship or appearing on this screen, we're going to be exploring together what it means to be the following of three things. We're going to look together today at what it means to be God-centred people. The next time we meet, I will be talking with you about what it means to be Christ-centred people. And then finally, we'll explore together what it means to be Spirit-filled people. So let's begin at the beginning and look at what it means to be God-centred people. I hope this morning that you've been able to explore together a bit about what is the most important part of your life. What are those things or those people that you dedicate a larger proportion of your time to than anything else? And I hope that you've been able to hear that actually we need to have God at the centre of our lives as much as any other thing that we've explored together. But I'm going to ask you again this morning, what is the most important thing that you do, or the most important people that you spend time with? If you asked me that question, I'd have to say the following things. And I'd have a hierarchy in which I would prioritise the things that I would want to spend time doing over and against other things. So of course, the first thing that I would say that I want to spend time doing, or spending time with people doing, is spending time with my family. And making time, which as you are all aware is premium, making time to be with them. Of course, the best time for me to do that is when I'm on holiday, because it means that my mind isn't occupied with lots and lots of different distractions and lots of lists of things that need to be done. So it's good to take time out and just be with my family, and I would say that is probably the most important part of my life. Next, after family, comes spending time with friends and making time to just catch up with friends and see what's been happening and what's been going on. Because without friends, life would be incredibly sad and would be a very sad place. And as we know, as we've talked about before, family are those people that we don't choose, but friends are the people that we do choose in our lives. They're the family that we choose for ourselves as we live out our lives. Next after friends, I would probably say would be my music, and just spending time enjoying the pure joy that music gives me, whether that's playing a musical instrument, whether that's singing, or whether that's just simply going off to a concert and enjoying listening to bands and to music groups that I have a particular passion for. After that, I would probably say that I would prioritise visiting places of historical interest, or just going out into the countryside and enjoying walking in the beautiful countryside and seeing and witnessing amazing vistas. And I think our country is full of those places. And then, perhaps after all of that, maybe enjoying a good film or reading a good book. Of course, the most observant of you will have noticed that I haven't mentioned in my list of priorities God, or faith, or the church. And I want to tell you that that is deliberate. Because for me, faith in God, attendance at church, being a disciple of Christ actually doesn't feature as a hierarchy of things that occupy my time, but actually should be there at every aspect of my life. They're not an optional extra. They're something that I should be thinking about all the time. So instead of faith in God, attendance at church, being a disciple of Jesus, simply being something that I choose to do and occupy my time with, they're just there in the background all the time, enabling me to see what God is up to, whether I'm spending time with my family or whether I'm out with friends, or whether I'm playing music, or whether I'm reading a good book, or whether I'm out in the countryside enjoying the beauty of creation, God should be there. We should be spending time in families talking about our faith. Equally, we should be spending time with friends, telling them about how important God actually is to us. Or when we're visiting a historical site, or visiting somewhere which is a place of natural beauty, we should be offering praise and worship to God. God should be there, and we should celebrate God's presence all the time and take pride in the fact that that gives us an identity as Christians. But as we all know, it's very difficult to bring faith, the church, our discipleship and our trust in God into every aspect of our lives. Because we live in an age where we are actively encouraged to separate our faith lives from our everyday lives. And faith now in the 21st century is something that is considered by lots of people to be a private thing, that we don't impose on other people, and we don't expect other people to be interested in the things that we do in our private life. So what we do here on a Sunday morning, we have to realise has no impact on the way in which we conduct the rest of our week, because we don't think of it as important, because it's private. It's something that's kept to one side and done in secret. I wonder how many of us will leave here this morning and go and tell anyone what we've done here, what we've said, what we've sung, what we've read. I wonder if any of us will even think about God and our faith from this moment to the rest of the week and to next Sunday when we're here again. Just imagine the scene for a moment. Having left here this morning and driven or walked home, you happen to see your next door neighbour in the garden enjoying the amazing weather that we've been experiencing. You arrive home, and as you walk up your garden path, your next door neighbour strikes up a conversation with you and asks you about how things are in general. They ask you how you are, and then they ask you what's been going on during the morning. Would you feel comfortable telling them that you've been to church this morning? Would you tell them something about what you've heard or what you've sung? Would you invite them? Let's be really bold and ask this question. Would you invite them to come and join you at worship next week? Come and share in your faith. Come and share and witness. Come and say, come and see what we have been doing. I wonder how comfortable you would feel doing that. If the answer to any of these things is no, you would probably feel uncomfortable. Then you have to ask yourself why that is. And maybe you have to seek to do something about it. Maybe you should this week promise yourself that when the opportunity arises, you will talk about what you do on a Sunday morning. What happens in worship? Why you go to worship? Why you have a faith in God? That's a challenge for you to think about. But don't worry about it, because we're going to think together a bit now about how we can do something about it as we consider what it means to be God-centred people. The reading that we heard from Deuteronomy chapter 6 verses 4 to 9 this morning are central to what it means to be in relationship with God. And we hear that from a Jewish perspective as we look at the Old Testament. The Jews all know these particular words from Deuteronomy 6 verses 4 to 9. They will be able to recite them. Hear, O Israel, the Lord our God, the Lord is one, and you shall love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, with all your mind, and with all your strength. those words take us to the heart of what it means to be in a covenant relationship with God, and that relationship that God has with his people. God has set his people free from their slavery in Egypt, and they in return are called by God to worship him with their whole lives. Moses, as he delivers these commands to the people of Israel in Deuteronomy chapter 6, gives them a commentary on what that actually might mean. He says they are to think about their relationship with God when they wake up in the morning. They are to think about their relationship with God when they go to sleep at the end of the day. They are to think about their relationship with God as they work. They are to think about their relationship with God as they do their daily tasks around the home. They are to think about their relationship with God when they're with their family. They're to think about their relationship with God when they're with their friends. And Moses even says that when they are with their family, they are to instruct each other on what being in relationship with God actually means to them. And this command that Moses is giving to the people is to be at the forefront of their minds. Life from this moment where this command is given to the people of Israel is about being a people who live their lives with God at the centre, with God in the middle, with God at the edge. God is something to be talked about. God is something to share. God is something to remember and to worship and glorify as the people of Israel deepen their relationship with God and with each other. In fact, there is no aspect of life or part where God isn't to be present and worshipped and glorified. And to hammer the point home even further, Orthodox Jews, even today, take these words from Deuteronomy 6 verses 4 to 9 literally. And they will bind these texts onto their foreheads, and they will bind these texts onto their arms, so that the Word of God is always before their eyes, and is always the thing that they think about when they do any activity with their hands. That is what it means to be God-centred. But I wonder how true it is for us. I wonder if God really is at the forefront of our minds every minute of our day. I wonder if we think about God when we do anything with our hands, when we do anything with our bodies. Do we give God praise, honour, and glory? All too often, I think, the worries and the concerns of our lives just simply crowd God out, and we forget about him without realising it. I knew a man who sought to correct that in his own life by asking God to be involved in everything that he did, and to show something new to him every time he did anything new, or did anything at all in his life. He told me that he would always pray about every situation that he was about to enter into. And he would say to God, "Look, God, please show me something new about what it means for me to be in relationship with you." So for him, whether he was meeting with people in the community, often quite challenging people and situations because he was a community worker, or whether he was out at the shops doing his grocery shopping, or whether he was out at the cinema or at a concert, or whether he was with his friends or his family, he told me that he would always pause and just ask God to reveal himself to him in a new way. And then he would give God praise and glory. Now, in some ways, that might feel incredibly uncomfortable. We might even feel that's unnatural for us to do. And we might even consider that particular man that I was telling you about to be a bit weird and a bit wacky. But if you ever met him, you would consider him to be the most normal man that you had ever encountered. He never rammed God down your throat, and he never tried to impose his way of life onto you. But you knew who was at the centre of his life and how much God meant to him. And, the conversation about how God featured in his life was so natural that you realised how important God was to him and the relationship that he was building with God was. And this, to me, is an example of taking Deuteronomy 6:4-9 seriously. Now I want to bring it forward a bit and look at the reading that we've heard from Luke's Gospel and that familiar passage of the parable of the Good Samaritan. Because Jesus, in the parable of the Good Samaritan, takes this whole thing a stage further, saying that we can only love God and have God at the centre of our lives when we see God in our neighbour and also in the stranger. And love for Jesus is about loving them as much as we love God himself. We know the story. The teacher of the law comes to Jesus and asks him to explore what is the greatest commandment. And Jesus says, love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your mind, with all your soul, and with all your strength. But he adds to it and he says, but also love your neighbour as you love yourself. And the teacher of the law applauds him for quoting those two greatest commandments that are discovered, as we've heard, in Deuteronomy and also in Leviticus. The teacher of the law then goes on to say, but what does it mean to be in relationship with God, and who is my neighbour? He knows what it means, you see. He knows that the greatest commandments are having God at the centre of your life. But he also wants to explore what that means. And so Jesus seeks to explore it with him by having a teaching session around a parable and a Good Samaritan. But Jesus has a surprise in store for him. Being God-centred, Jesus says, means even loving those that you hate or that you don't recognise as being like you. And as you engage with those people who you don't like or that you think aren't like you, you need to recognise that by staring into their eyes, Jesus is saying, you are looking at the face of God. This is often the part of the parable, when we read the parable, that we miss. Because we tend to focus on the amazing compassion of an outsider over and against those who we believe should know better and who would have been at the centre of the religious community and would have known their Bible intimately. And if we look at what the teacher of the law says at the end, he himself cannot even begin to acknowledge that as he looks at, say, a Samaritan, he is looking at the face of God. Because all he can say is this: when Jesus says, who was the person who acted like a neighbour to the man attacked by robbers? All he can say is, the one who was most kind to him. He cannot bring himself to say the word Samaritan. Because by bringing that word into his vocabulary, he would have made himself ritually unclean as the priest or the Levite in the story. Jews understood loving your neighbour as you loved yourself as being simply those like you. But Jesus is moving it on a stage further and saying, look, you can't love God unless you love your neighbour. And that means even those people that you don't get on with, those people you don't like, those people who are not like you. Because as you look into their eyes, you are seeing the face of God. Loving God and loving your neighbour means putting God at the centre and putting people at the centre of your life too. And this is what God-centred means. Recognising the face of God and the presence of God with whoever and whatever situation you find yourself in. And not only recognising God is there, but then celebrating that relationship and celebrating God's love for you. So the question that I want to leave you with this morning is simply this. Is God at the centre of your life? And in what ways are you seeking to make your faith known of Him to others? Let's be God-centred people this week, and let's seek to bring God into every situation we find ourselves in. Amen.